So innovation, like you just were talking about, has a lot of specific skills. I always tend to look at when we're starting to get into this kind of messy, innovate, try, adapt. I'm interested in what we're doing in the professional space to invoke systems change in terms of actualizing these skills and embodying these skills. I'm also incredibly invested in building these skills into curriculum of higher education. So what we're doing is cultivating innovative thinkers. Like we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast, this idea of, we were told this story, right? You go to school, you get a degree, you go into the workforce, you get a job, maybe you get a pension, you buy your house and your car and your 2.5 kids. That story is not true anymore. For a large swath of our population, the certificate, the degree doesn't cut it anymore. Employers are looking for more. Higher ed needs to be responding. Again, the policy, the strategic policy level of higher ed is in the midst. They're moving, we're shaking, we're trying. But it's often, as you just articulated in the government work, it's slower up there. There's so many stakeholders and people who are trying to be heard that often all you get is a statement of intention. We intend to make our universities and our colleges more responsive. We intend to be producing innovators. And it just happens on a slower basis. But I do see a lot of instructors in the front line service provision of education trying to embed some of these skills, trying to teach them straight up and integrate them into what they're teaching, even though it's not necessarily a government requirement. And their curriculum documents are already hundreds and hundreds of pages long. They know, individual teachers know, an individual program and service providers like ourselves, we're trying to bake it in, these skills. What other skills come to your mind when you say we want to be teaching innovation skills, we want to be supporting these skills? What are some other of those tangible habits or observable behaviors we should be looking for?
So that's interesting. Like one of the things, there are some skills that I can talk to you about because as I'm currently in the employer's shoes, I actually spend my days writing job descriptions. So I can tell you that there's a lot of those skills that, come to my mind, and they have a lot to do with a kind of demanding combination, frankly, for those higher education graduates and people that teach them, of transferable skills and sort of domain-specific technical skills. It's kind of like we need both. Some of the ones that support innovation in particular, I think, are the skills that relate to collaboration and adaptability. And so they can be sort of you can think about them as more fine-grained than those terms. But for collaboration, a lot of it will start with communication, good communication, ability to kind of work with a range of people skills. And that sounds very corny because we talk about it all the time. But the more we need to collaborate, the more we need to be fluid at that kind of human interaction. So I think those skills, which are communication, collaboration, teamwork, team leadership, actually negotiation is an important one. I think that's something that sometimes is thought as just for lawyers or diplomats, but it's extremely important because we are all trying to kind of, again, find that common ground. So these skills for me are some of the most important ones. And then there's, of course, another slew of skills that are becoming more and more important, that are more on the technical side. And I think those ones have to do a lot, to me, and also in my experience sort of researching that, with the proficiency with technology. And so what we call digital literacy is now probably kind of an outdated word because it's not literacy, it's more than that. It's digital proficiency, digital mastery. I mean, you probably need to talk about advanced skills in this area of working with machines. So that's something that we could talk about as well for a long time, but those are the two domains that I see as supporting innovation in a very important way. Those people-specific skills, and then those digital machine-specific skills.
Yes, so, and the idea of interpersonal skills, for lack of a better word, those ones of people skills. There are a lot of different ways that leaders have looked at structuring workplaces, structuring schedules, valuing those collaborative moments, in baking in more intentional, meaningful ways to collaborate with each other. And there's a lot of software and hardware that's in support of that interpersonal dimension. The one that I feel is harder to hire for, and I'd love to know your insights on it, and it's a hard skill to assess. I'm also an assessment geek, and you know, we share a fondness for the research and in this field in particular. The being able to observe someone's behaviors as indicators of a skill being acquired, right? I could see communication. I could read it in an email. I could often see your ability to negotiate. What steps did you take? How did you, move towards consensus? The more nuanced skills, and I feel are the foundational ones, are those intrapersonal skills. The relationship a person has with themselves, which is a hard thing to see at the point of a job interview. It becomes real obvious when people start working with you, if they can regulate their emotions, if they're self-starters, if they need, can they go forward and build something with self-determination, come back and ask for feedback before that's too far along in the line, right? It's a delicate balance. Self-awareness. Do I know what my triggers are when I work with others? Like, do I understand myself? That intrapersonal dimension, which feeds on to everything. How do you feel some of those skills? Oh, do you look for those skills? Have you defined any sort of clear criteria in terms of being able to investigate whether someone has those skills? Because one of the other things, it's kind of in line with self-determination and self-awareness, informed decision making. So making a decision requires that you've done a few things, right? I don't necessarily see them. They're not as maybe some of them are tangible. Did you refer to the sources that you needed to, and so on? But I feel like a lot of the things, and this will get us into some of the minutia about what we're actually developing and in together in our collaboration, as a university and a media production provider. We're asking students in this world of hybrid skill development, in this world of we're always on technology and we're always kind of doing things in a hybrid format, no matter what our job is anymore. We're requiring a lot of autonomy, a lot of kind of people. We're asking people to make informed decisions. Do you need to take that module? Is that a piece of information you need, or do you need it to make that decision or not? Move forward, maybe review. No, maybe you should go back and look at that thing one more time. Like there's this whole responsibility and ownership we're asking someone to take of their learning in an educational context, or just the decisions that they're making on a day-to-day basis. And so much I feel of the world around us is convenience oriented, and like not asking people to be discerning or do that due diligence. So yeah, especially someone coming at you, looking to hire a 20-year-old. Sorry to hate on the whatever generation you are, 20-year-olds, but yeah, someone who maybe hasn't gone through the trials and errors of, oh, I don't know myself very well. Oh, I want to learn more about it. How does one look for those intrapersonal skills?
I mean, you're just hitting, the nail on the head of like the issue of assessing skills, which is employers' like, biggest challenge. And that's the reason why they continue to rely on degrees, which we probably will have an opportunity to discuss more. But I think the ability to observe those kind of like behavioral kind of elements of a person's like workplace like the workplace behavior of somebody, the ability to be self-regulating is really hard to observe, except if it's kind of in practice. So for me, like we found that there's kind of two ways in which we are trying to do that. I mean, in Sandbox, it's a very good example because we are dealing with a very large number of projects that are very different and that require a lot of decision making at any given point by people that are sometimes quite new in their career, or we have a technical skill set that may not have been explicitly learning about decision making, not intentionally at least. So I think there's kind of two ways that we go about this. One of them has to do with like the whole like recruitment process, where like we try to kind of ensure that we have different ways of asking people to tell stories, and we kind of watch the way they tell the stories. What is it that how are they reflecting on the story? So one of the questions I love, like for employers out there, is like, like asking someone about what challenge they faced, and then what they took from it for their own personal learning as a result. Like, what did you learn from this? And I find that a lot of people, when you hear them tell a story, they actually forget the second half of the question, which tells you quite a bit about like just the difficulty of some people to just be self-reflective and take something from an experience. I think it's great to prompt people and to encourage them to think this way. I think it's just not going to come like right out of like a degree program. It's going to be an experience. It's going to be a on the job. Like, are you actually being supported by your employer to think about what you could have done differently? What is it that like maybe your way of approaching the process, or your maybe overconfidence or lack of confidence contributed to an outcome that could have been different? I think it's the role of like, let's say, the employer-based or like the work integrated learning opportunities really to help learners like students do that, because I don't think that you can do that by just like acquiring knowledge, or even like even when you're looking at like some of the more implicit ways that you might be able to become a self like regulated person. These are kind of assumed. Like you said, we don't really talk to learners or employees about that kind of like much more intrapersonal aspect. We talk about whether they've done well, like technically speaking, and in terms of relationships with clients, partners, and other staff. So I think that kind of like helping people think this way is the job of the practical setting. So whether it is a job interview, or it is a practicum, it is an internship, or even in a kind of like more traditional academic context, whatever group work you're assigning to a group of students, asking that self-reflection explicitly, I think is necessary, because otherwise it's going to depend on people's personalities. And I think that's just a little bit unfair. Like, we should be able to help everyone understand how important it is.
Yes. And these are some of the foundational, in terms of the work I'm particularly doing in the higher education field. It's about these skills of innovation and having them very clearly, not only innovation, these are skills that can promote resilience and responsiveness or adaptability, agility. There's lots of different words that people use as outcomes. But ultimately, this idea of understanding one's relationship to yourself, being able to understand, maintain, build, and sustain relationships with others, navigate the consumption or accumulation of information, but then the use of that information in practical, adaptable ways. These are things that, like you say, we need to be preparing people for these long before they enter the workforce, and they should be from kindergarten all the way through secondary to higher education and tertiary education systems. We're no longer just content focused. But one of the cool innovations that we're working on, so we were grateful, York University and Sandbox Incorporated, we were the recipient of a series of eCampus Ontario grants, where we were matched together, and as a service provider and an institution, we are working together. We've been working together now for over 3 years on the design and development of some really cool, innovative professional development modules for instructors. So York University identified this problem, which was, we're doing all this research in innovative ways of designing a course, the what curriculum, the how pedagogy, and the why, the assessment structures, speaking to this, embedding innovation skills being one of the things we were doing. So we're learning all this stuff about teaching and learning in these courses, and designing with technology, and supporting experiential learning and modularized curriculum. Well, we want scale of that. We want to mobilize this knowledge at scale. So we were given funding to create these really amazing Netflix inspired, right? Because it matters. People need to want to watch these things. Modules, 6 of them that have a few different innovative components that I thought we could pull on in terms of like setting the stage for this conversation in this minutia area, right? Like the macrocosmic idea of systems change, and what are the policy decisions, and how are we researching this to provide governments and administrative decision makers with what they need to build these structures and these incentives. But we're also, we play up there, but we also play down here in the actual tangible kind of, let's try something innovative and see what happens place. So I just wanted to share with our listeners some of the exciting things happening there. Like for me, in the academic side of things, we're doing self-paced learning. we're also trying to bring in PLAR. It's a hot topic in education, prior learning assessment and recognition. Not everybody has the same starting point, right? So if you're coming to our really cool module on competency-based evaluation, like measuring skills in a science class, like communication and critical thinking, you're going to hopefully at some point, we're going to play in the space and build out structures for you to be able to start. Maybe you need more direction. Maybe you need more support. Maybe we're going to lock some modules for you. Maybe you know this material already and we want to get you to choose a different starting point at the area, like the what, the why, the how. Where do you need to go? What interests you? That's something really exciting, I think. That's part of these modules. The other thing around content organization is, at the beginning, we were talking about when I asked you, how does education play as a systemic lever at the point of economies and societies? You talked about equipping citizens. And one of the reasons that we go to school is because we want to be given some sort of a designation, some sort of the valid stamp of approval, right? Well, digital badging and micro-credentialing, we're going to be playing in our modules with an opportunity to provide instructors with the incentive to come on in and play with us and learn with us, because there's a credentialing option that you could tangibly leverage to be more mobile in your career. What are some things about working at Sandbox or our project specifically that excites you?
So I love the way you're kind of talking about the delving in, right? Like, you go from that policy level, that systemic level, which is sort of like motivating all the things that we do. And then you kind of like, then you really go to that level of like, and now how do we do it? So that's one of the things I find the most fascinating, because absolutely, once we sort of like, establish that we need to build, and that's back to your question around collaboration, building that motivation, that like finding that intrinsic motivation into people. The same thing is facing us as we're designing those modules, those self-paced learning modules. So to me, what is extremely exciting about that project that we are working on together, which I think exemplifies quite well sort of the Sandbox like approach to problems, it is to say, well, we know that we have research around like some of the new ways of like supporting teaching and learning that could be very effective for sort of helping graduates succeed in the labor market or succeed in the digital society. Some of it is that we know employers want students to have competencies, they want to have skills, and they want to be able as employers to know that they have those skills and competencies. So that's when the sort of like badging and credentialing comes in. So we know that these are demands of the world. We know that like educators don't always see their role and have not necessarily been trained to kind of like respond to the need for that particular skill, that particular competency, and proving it to employers. That's not necessarily where they're coming from. So here again, we're trying to be translators and honest brokers between the world out there and our educators in our system. So we need to cater to educators so they feel that what we're doing is relevant to them. It's relevant to the end user, the learner, so that they will become better educators and support the learner into their navigation of the digital world. And for them, they will actually feel like empowered by taking our module. So for me, like when we start from that kind of, and that's what's new for me, and I really do like it, that user experience focus. We're talking about two kinds of users, and that's what we keep in mind as we work on those modules. The learner, eventually, who will be the learner that educator will impact. But then the educator is this professional faculty member, this academic person is the person that we want to kind of help acquire just the right amount of skill and knowledge that they need to sort of like bridge them into adopting new practices, such as competency-based evaluation or developing a micro-credential. So we want to be able to design something that's just the right amount that they feel that's useful and that's not overbearing. And I think that's our challenge, and that's where the excitement really is, because that's where we can talk about T-shaped learning experiences. Employers always want T-shaped graduates. I think we need to create T-shaped learning experiences so people can have this sort of like breadth and have a quick understanding of what is the program about, the course about, and they can pick and choose where they will dive. And to me, that's creating a lot of design and technological sort of questions, obviously, because this means something much more personalized than the traditional way of creating digital learning, which would be, filming a professor and putting it online. So when you try to do something personalized, it becomes complex because there's multiple routes that are possible. But at least I feel like the way of crafting the information, I think one key thing that when we're talking about adult learners, they're acquiring information all the time. They are constantly learning, seeking, new information. Like they're researchers. They are looking for filling their own knowledge gap. So they are people that are dealing with information. We need to help them feel like this is exactly something that will fit in their schedule in a useful way.
Yeah.
And complement their kind of like their ability to search for information around them.
And get an interest in it, because the whole premise of making engaging learning experiences or using graphics or having it be visually dynamic, we think that that's important when we have young learners. But then when we have adult learners, we give them pages of scripts. We give them, a workbook that's like so dense and, and we forget that we are still the same learning brain that reacts to pictures and sounds and music. And one of the things that we're doing together that's really exciting is leveraging, obviously, all your in-house media content creation expertise. And we're producing videos of this content, these concepts that are about academic innovation that could be communicated in a very dry lecture-based format, slide format. But we're doing them in animations. You're creating these tailored voiceover, stock image. If our listeners haven't gone on to Netflix and watched the Explained series, this amazing 20-minute videos of explaining the stock market or explaining Bitcoin or whatever. We talked about that approach where, we log on to Netflix and we'll binge watch something in an evening. Why aren't we creating professional development kinds of content that we want to binge watch? That we want to just, where's that next video? That was fascinating. That was so interesting. So, and that's really our collaboration, being a technical and teaching and learning focused collaboration. This speaks to, another shared vision that we have where teaching and technology are no longer separate things. Tim Foz at the University of Edinburgh, he calls it entangled pedagogy. We're living this value, Patricia. You have technologists, I have teachers, we come together, we talk about what do we want the educational experience, what does it look like with integrity for someone to be said, to be taken through a journey and learning. How do we say they've learned something? Versus how do we technically actually build that pathway on a platform and then make sure that at every stage along that journey, there's dynamicism, there's visual content, there's an opportunity for me to navigate back. Oh, that was an interesting concept. Remember this definition? Click it and it'll take you back to that section of the video that talks about that concept. We are embodying something that systems changers, whether at the policy level or those sandbox practitioners, we need to be moving forward with innovation and education with these voices equally, if not equitably represented, right? Where we come together and we say, this is what we would love to teach. This is what the technology functions and features, how we can support that. But it's not technology as a tool. It is technology as an interwoven component of the educational design sector.
Yes, and I can agree with you more. And actually, it's interesting because I was attending this conference in October at EDUCAUSE. So that's a large, for listeners that may not be aware of it, it's a large IT higher education conference held by this nonprofit in the US that's really sort of bringing together, all of the actors that play in technology in higher ed. And one of the things that was fascinating is to come with the insight that at the end of the conference, technology is kind of like a person sitting at the leadership table. It's almost like you cannot just view the technology as this sort of like after the fact thought or pure infrastructural component. It is going to fundamentally impact and influence what content and how it is delivered, what content is delivered and how we should actually go about delivering it. So I think what we are trying to do is a little bit of an experiment, so to speak, of a kind of like, trying to chart a path with an example, a very tangible example of what a kind of technology influence learning ecosystem could look like. Because we talk a lot about technology enabled learning, But I think it's going to be more than that. Like, it's not going to be just about enabling through, like some tools that allow for more access or more flexibility. Technology will influence the way we teach in much more profound ways. And I can't be on this podcast and not talk about ChatGPT, because that would be remiss. But that's a great example of a very typical sort of technological disruption that's posing a question to educators as to what pedagogical changes do they need to make now that that reality is out here. And I think this is the same thing about like when we try to do like dynamic, engaging visual content, we're not doing it just because we have the capacity of improving the experience. That's part of it. I think improving the experience of learners is extremely important, because this is one of the ways that you get intrinsic motivation, is that the experience is actually high quality. But it's not just that. I think one of the important aspects is that we are living in the world which is already driven by a Netflix style approach to consumption. And people are learning everywhere, on YouTube, on Wikipedia, anywhere. So in a certain way, it's really technology influenced learning, where it's just part of, it's one of the people at the table.
Exactly.
So it's more than just a tool, for sure.
I mean, and you think about it, in a marriage, it's not person one and person two, it's a marriage, right? And I'm trying to figure out, we'll figure it out. So, or if you please contribute your ideas in the comments, but it's not person one, person two, it's marriage. It's not teaching and technology. It's, I don't know, teachology. I don't know. The digital university, we've played with a lot of terms, but a really important consideration that takes place both at that strategic systems level and then also in the sandbox, this integration. Patricia, I'm ending the podcast. I called them rapid fire questions, but then I've changed it now to the ticket out the door question, because it's much more educational language. So I've got a few questions here for your ticket out the door. Just the first thing that comes to mind when you finish this sentence: teaching is
a transformative experience.
Learning is
gaining freedom.
Oh, wow, yeah, emancipation. Education systems are
the way to create good societies.
That structural element. Let's use the word, it's a big word to bring into the end, but this idea of digital transformation, if we want to think of education now as being inherently, influenced by the digital, what is something that you're excited about, that you're hopeful about, that you're interested in, a trend that you're watching, or something that you think might be interesting coming down the pipeline when it comes to this digital transformation we're experiencing?
I think that one of the things that I'm really hopeful about is that by sort of and it's kind of the micro-credential trend, but I would just say short learning opportunities, the more they are done well, and the more they are kind of like, like becoming more familiar and become recognized, I think they will be opening the door for so many people that have just not had the opportunity of learning since a young age. So for me, like, that's the one hope, is that sort of like, micro nanobyte type of learning really can help people like just improve their life, even though they might have thought that this was it for them. So that's my hopeful note.
What a beautiful, I feel like every podcast I say this, but I need to start doing this, putting together like a concept map of like a visual representation of the sessions. Because from that micro credentialing, that bite-sized, short duration learning experience that you just ended with, Patricia, I can zoom that all the way back out to that ultimate purpose that you had as a child, wanting to positively contribute to the development of the world. And look how we go, we ping pong back and forth between that ultimate systems level vision and the practical sandbox experiences of building these things out. It's a privilege to be a colleague and a collaborator of yours, and I look forward to continuing our work together and sharing more about it on this podcast. And thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thanks, Michelle. This was really lovely. So yeah, absolutely. Anytime.
The Education Revolution podcast is produced in-house by community members, and I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Sangera. Thank you for listening to this week's episode, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and head over to my website to opt in for my newsletter for more ways to connect with some of these big ideas.